Hello, and thanks for joining us today. We'll get started in about a minute here, give people time to log in and get settled. Just one thing that we'll cover, you'll hear this a few times from me, but this is being recorded, and we will share that out with you at the end. Okay, we'll get started. Welcome. I just want to say thank you again for joining us all today. I know this is a big ask of everyone's time, I know, but appreciate it. I'm Will Patch. I'm the enrollment marketing leader here at Niche, and today I'm going to be sharing some of the results from our recent survey of HECA members. I'm also really happy to be joined today by Cheri, Barad, and Pauline Godfrey from HECA, who will help add some thoughts and some context as we go through. A few housekeeping things that always come up. We are recording this. It will be sent out in an email. You should be getting that tomorrow with additional resources and a recording link, just as a thanks for attending. You can view all the results in detail on the Enrollment Insights blog. If you just want to get there in the shorthand way, it's niche.bz/insights. You'll find it. It'll be one of the first posts up there. If you don't want to try and find it, the link will be in the email as well. So as you have questions and comments today as we go through, feel free to enter those in the box in the GoToWebinar console. That should load usually on the right side of your screen, and you can enter any questions in there, and I'll help moderate those at the end. So I just wanted to say thank you again and introduce our panelists. Cheri Barad is the president of HECA, among with other daytime duties. And Pauline Godfrey is our president-elect of HECA. So if you want to introduce yourselves.
Great. Hi, Will. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I don't know where everyone is, so happy Tuesday. And thanks so much. I'm Cheri Barad. I have the great honor of being the president of the Higher Education Consultants Association. I've been a member for over 20 years, and it's a wonderful organization, and I like working with our kids and wonderful, wonderful colleagues. So thanks again, Will, for hosting us today.
Pauline?
Yes. Good morning. I'm on the West Coast, so it is morning. And thank you, Will, and thank you, Niche, for providing HECA an opportunity to share our thoughts and our experiences. I think this is so valuable for us. And I have been an IC for, I think this is 18 years, and I hail from Los Angeles and Seattle, and have the pleasure and huge responsibility of following Cheri into the presidency of HECA.
Yeah, and thank you both. And Pauline's the one here today not shoveling snow, so.
Yes.
True,
Yes.
that's so true.
That is correct. That is correct. Look at the big smile on her face.
So a few bits about the survey here before we go right in. This was sent out to HECA members so that we get sort of that long view. I've been doing a number of surveys with Niche of students, of parents, but you don't really have that long view that you can get, and that's where independent educational consultants come in, being able to provide the experience of, 5 years ago, here's what we were seeing, things that might be new to a student, they may have seen before. So that was just of HECA members, so we can get that view. This was done during December. It was mid-December through January 3rd. All the results, if you want to dig through them and get a better sense of what's going on, are available on the blog. But we're going to dig into 10 of those insights and what those can mean for your planning and strategy. So a little bit about the respondents here. We did see that independent educational consultants were more in demand this year. I think likely that's due to a loss of accessibility for a lot of the school counselors, college counselors. If you're not in school every day, it's a little bit harder to send an email or just pick up a phone. Students, it's easy access when you're right there during the school day. they're spread even more thin, So we did see 87% reporting similar or higher interest from families than in prior years. The median experience level was 10 years. So as I was talking about that long view, that's a good chunk of experience, because these are people who have had a great deal of experience as college counselors, as admissions counselors before taking on this role. So there's a great pool of experience there. Most of the counselors did work with U.S. families. The majority did have some aspect, some people they worked with at least online. We even had about a quarter who worked with international students. We do have a breakout in the results for international students as well. So getting into our first insight here, I'll hand it off.
Great. All right, Pauline, you want to take this one, or you want me to take it?
You can take it, Cheri.
Okay.
We're going to be alphabetical.
All right. Okay. I think what was interesting about the former slide, and Pauline, you can probably attest to this too, but the first bar of the graph, where it noted online clients anywhere. I think that's a huge dramatic change. And I think once we went to the online, virtual, COVID, I do think all of us, regardless of what our situation was, we're hearing from a lot of our colleagues that we shifted, and a lot of people gave up their brick and mortar offices. We're all doing it. We're working with kids differently. So I think that that's one of the biggest differences, I think, between this year's seniors and prior years. For me, and I think that correlated very nicely with the prior slide. Far as the students I work with, and I recently, in the last couple of years, just relocated to the Midwest from the East Coast, although I had been working virtually with students all over the country prior. I think we have different perspectives, and that's something Pauline and I chatted about, that I think that, we can bring a little bit of a difference in however the audience members also, and the people who filled out the survey. But for the students that I worked with, I did not have a paradigm shift in kids wanting to stay closer. For the most part, the students I have always worked with will look at a vast array geographically all over the country. So just because I was predominantly on the East, Northeast specifically, I didn't send most of my kids just to the East Coast that I worked with. Pauline, do you want to jump in, and maybe you can address part of the other two?
Sure. I think, first of all, in reference to the slide before, Cheri, the comment you made about our work being more virtual, for some of us, the majority of our work has been virtual for a while, and certainly for all of us, our work has become virtual, or a good part of our work has become virtual. And I think, referring to what Will mentioned about the long haul and planning ahead, I'm really interested to see and to discuss with colleagues what their work will look like when we aren't required to remain virtual anymore. So I think that's a conversation we'll want to have going forward. And in terms of the first insight and my particular students, I would say the demographics of my student group has not changed much. I still have a majority of West Coast clients, particularly in Washington and in California, even though I do have students from other parts of the country. And my students were more interested in staying closer to home. And I found that the difference between our initial lists and the final applications changed significantly. That it was really difficult for families to think about students going far away. So I did see a significant switch. And the other significant switch was very pointed questions about diversity, about the demographics of a campus, and about safety of campus life. Very pointed questions became more frequent in those areas.
And Pauline, what are one or two things that students point to when they're evaluating the diversity and equity on campus?
They want to know what the racial makeup is of a campus. They want to know what the support services for underserved populations are? That's a very pointed question for a lot of my students.
Mhm.
Once I get on campus,
Mhm.
am I going to be able to be successful there? And what is the college going to do to support that success?
Our second insight here, we had about a third of counselors report that seniors are having more significant emotional and social barriers.
I think that's true of everyone, and certainly true of our students. And I found that the further we were into the process, the more significant those barriers became. At the beginning, I think we were all thinking that this world we're living in would be short term and we would get back to normal. And then as we went through the end of the high school year and there was no prom and no graduation and none of those normal rites of passage, it became more difficult for students to engage at some time. And then when it became apparent school was not starting the way they thought school would start, it became more so. And I found some of my students who were very anxious to engage frequently and were very verbal and very engaged, needed a little more encouragement in order to sort of finish that process towards the end of the application cycle.
And I would only add, I mean, again, I think I agree with Pauline. Not only the seniors, what I'm hearing from the seniors is that their parents are just way over involved now. What used to kind of be a healthy distance, maybe escape to school, as far as every aspect of their life, extracurriculars, etc., is, and I'm seeing it with some parents, that in our meetings, the parent is right around the corner and listening, and then you might get a recap or you might get a follow-up email. Well, I'm just curious, even though I try very hard, I always send all my kids recaps, and parents, I send the copy. I think that it's extending not only, into the family, and I think some of that is a little bit of the breeding ground, and it's understandable. Parents are anxious. They've got a different set of questions. I think they're very, very concerned about, of course, safety, kind of thing. But I think the kids are also, for the kids that I talk to, are also anxious about, am I going to get to go? They've been waiting for 17 years to this rite of passage. And, they hear their friends or their older siblings, and college is great and it's wonderful. And regardless of the good and the bad, they're excited. And now all of a sudden, is the door going to be shut? Or they hear some of their friends weren't able to go to school this year and are virtually learning. So I think that, this is just a packed issue. There's no doubt about it. We're all being, I think extra sensitive. I really do. And all the webinars I've listened to, I think the colleges are doing a phenomenal job. I mean, absolutely phenomenal job. And reading apps and trying to pick up on nuances and assure these kids in their webinars that when they do come, they're going to be ready for them. So, but I think that there's this fear. Will I be able to go through the process like I wanted to, or and I'm just going to say it, am I going to be stuck home next year virtually learning with my parents and my little brothers and sisters? So that's part of the stressor too.
Yeah. And we did a senior survey last fall, and the biggest decline we saw was in students who said that they felt confident that they were socially and emotionally prepared for college. And so I'm a little concerned to see what this fall survey is going to show.
Right. Be interesting for sure.
Yeah. Our third insight here, 19% of counselors reported that more seniors are interested in taking a gap year, and 17% said more seniors were interested in deferring a year even. So what are you hearing, and what are some of the reasons there?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in first on this one, Pauline. Maybe I'm an anomaly. I don't know. Maybe I'm an odd duck. My kids want to go to school. They do not want to stay home. They do not want a gap. The parents might be saying, if they have to sit, in their dorm room and learn. And I have a fair number of kids sitting in a dorm room. I just spoke with a family last night. They went ahead and went to school, but they're in a dorm room, and or they're off campus housing, but they're with their community. The students I work with, my seniors right now, my juniors that are looking, my freshmen that are in, that's what they want to do. I had a young man who just started school 2 weeks ago because they deferred. They, as a family, didn't defer, but the school deferred opening first semester, and he was just beside himself, not only to go, but to get there and, just to meet those people. Again, it was a delay, not on his part, and he was so anxious. So again, that for me and the students I've worked with, they're ready to rock, they're ready to go. So how about you, Pauline?
It's been interesting because I feel like the conversations I'm having with my families around gap year and deferring is more a response to what they're hearing from other families and not so much a personal interest, but they want to know. They want to know what the options are. They want to know the advantages. They want to know the disadvantages. They want to know the possibilities, which I think is a really healthy way to approach it. But that's always cloaked with, we really hope he or she are in school next year. We really hope our child is in school next year. And of course, for the students, there's nothing they want more. But there is the hesitancy and there is the curiosity. So I'm finding that I'm answering the questions frequently and sharing information, but no one with whom I've worked has made a commitment to do that yet.
I think we don't want to be a Chicken Little, but at the same time, more students considering may mean more students actually following through. But I think you're right that it's a good time to explore your options.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, it's a lot of these quandaries, a lot of these questions are obviously not going to be clear until in the spring, and we really know what decisions are made. But you're absolutely right. No one wants to be the one raising the flag, that's for sure.
Yep.
Right.
Fourth insight here, we had 68% of counselors responding encourage students to engage with colleges on social media as a way to get in front of colleges and show interest. So what are some ways that they can do that? And if you have seen anything that colleges do really well to respond even?
Well, I would say absolutely, because that's what they have to do. That's the way to become familiar with schools and for schools to become familiar with them. And I encourage my students not only to attend the webinars, to be sure that they're signing in, that their presence is recorded, but also to make personal contacts whenever possible with the people who have presented the webinar afterwards, and also wherever possible to make those connections with current students at the school. I think that's a really good way to get information, to gain insight that our students used to gain when they were on a campus visit, or if they had the opportunity for an overnight. And of course, we can't do that now. So whatever personal contact can be made, I think the better. And to follow up, always follow up with a personal email, a personal contact whenever you can.
I think, Will, what I would add to that, thanks, Pauline. I think what I would add to that, I just had an experience with a young lady that, is very excited about a school and listened to a virtual webinar. And what I suggested is that, and this is not anything I came up with, I know we all do it, but I suggested within the major that she specifically, because a lot of the virtual tours, of course, are very generic and, which are wonderful, but, I suggested to her, and part of it, I wanted her to be the advocate, to reach out to and get on the website. Let's find the major that you're interested in and find someone in the advising for that particular program. And she did, and she contacted them, and she invited me. We had a wonderful Zoom meeting with the advisor for the major. It happened to be landscape architecture. And so she wanted to kind of understand like deeply their particular, how they teach. I mean, we can all look at the syllabus, we can look at the bulletin, but she really wanted to find out about the hands-on. And at a major, huge, big research university, she found out there's only 80 kids in the program. And that she just is so excited, because that made her feel like, oh my gosh, that's going to make like almost like the small school I'm at, and these great relationships with these professors. And so the advisor was just fantastic to walk her through some of the personal elements of that. And that comfort level just shot through the roof with her. And it was just, I was so proud of her for not only handling this, but just thinking of some questions, and it made her feel really comfortable. And what really I'm also seeing is the outreach that the schools are willing to do. And whether it's, okay, I'll try and put you in touch with a student, or whatever it is, that I think, and I'm shouting out to the colleges, they're doing the absolute best thing that I think as a whole that they could be doing right now. And they have been so receptive to these kids. They're getting it. I was on a webinar a couple of days ago, and I heard a panel of 4, and out of the 4 reps, 3 of them had kids going through the process. They get it. They're living this process. So I just think the social media is wonderful, but I also think just a little bit of being resourceful and encourage our kids to be a little more resourceful. And yes, even if it's a student or a current student, sometimes kids, I think, for my part, I think sometimes, ooh, I'm 17 and nobody, I'm this, kid, and nobody's going to want to talk to me that's like a senior or a junior. And, and I know we're really good on our HECA listserv. We try to help one another out. Do you have a kid so-and-so or a student so-and-so that maybe they could talk to one another, just maybe break the ice? So I think that's another way. Social media, has just opened up the world for these kids. So it's opening all kinds of opportunities. They just have to reach out and grab them. So.
I think that's such a great reminder, Cheri, especially with a highly specialized program, such a good idea to have a conversation with someone who's there in that program.
Right.
That's a great reminder.
Yeah.
Fifth insight here. We had 79% say that students are still considering and applying to colleges that they hadn't visited yet, but are less interested in them. So they're still going through that process, maybe just keep them on that back burner or hope they can take a spring visit. But what are some things you're seeing?
Exactly this. I think that because students and families are not able to visit schools, they're widening the field a bit. If I can't visit anyway, why not put schools that are 3,000 miles away on my list, because I can't visit the one that's 30 miles away. So opening up the doors, which I think is a really good thing, because I struggle sometimes, particularly with my West Coast kids, helping them to understand life away from the West Coast, and really encouraging them to look at schools in the Midwest in particular. The Northeast is a pretty easy sell. Sometimes the South is of interest, but places that they can't imagine going, but putting it on a list and encouraging them to do the type of research that we were talking about opens up doors and provides information and inspiration that might not have been there before. So, and the schools they're less interested in, I think because this is such an unknown right now, that the tendency to just hedge all bets is perfectly normal, perfectly normal. Hopefully we did a really good job of narrowing those just because it looks interesting schools to manageable lists, particularly before they write the application. So we were able to do that pretty well this last time around, and hoping it will prove true. But I think the research, the investigation, the open-mindedness is really a good thing.
Agree. And I'm just going to do a little shout out shamelessly, Will, about, one of the things we have to do, one of our requirements as HECA members is to visit campuses. And even going through the same thing, because to renew our membership, we're supposed to be on campus. And as our, membership chair, Maureen Chang, has been getting, phone calls and letters and emails, what do I do now? So we're pressed into the same thing. We're having to get on virtual tours and refamiliarize ourselves. But I think part of it too, what I'm doing, especially now with my juniors and seniors, and I did with my last year's group, is reassure them and ask them, please, at the inception of our working relationship, is just to trust that if, for the most part, I've probably been to the campus over the last 20 years, I'm probably going to recommend or put on their list. And I do a lot of the web searches with them. But if I haven't been on a campus or they come to me with something that's a nuance that I'm just not familiar with, I am so fortunate because I have these 1,100 other people that I work with, and I am able to throw it up on our listserv and, talk to the kids and say, gosh, I just talked to Pauline, who is up in Seattle. Yeah, she can talk to us about the University of Washington on a more specific basis. So I think that's the other thing. There's a lot of trust. And I think that the kids are having to learn that. And as I tease them, 25, 30 years ago, they don't want to hear about that. Nobody jumped on the plane and went all over the country and all over the world to look at schools. We didn't have the internet. I know that's hard to believe. And so, I'm trying to do a little Andy Mayberry thing, this is the way it was done. And please, I know you haven't been able to visit, and I know that's your benchmark right now, but you've got to understand the schools don't spend these gazillion dollars on these websites, because it's pretty. You've got to imagine yourself being there, and you've got to trust, like Pauline said too. Maybe by spring, we're hearing from more colleges that they will have limited visits, and let's hope that is the case. But right now, I think that we just have to rely on each other and rely on them just to trust that I've been on that campus. This is what you're going to see. Yes, we looked at the virtual. Yes, that's what it is. If you're talking about a city school, what is that city going to look like? What is that? So we're going right back to the same foundations. I think just part of it is just their fear, but I think we just have to ask them to trust us. I'm putting this list together also with you in mind. And I think that's something else we do really well as IDCs. We get to know our kids. We get to know them. So we're having an opportunity to have those discussions.
Yeah. Next insight here, just under half, 44% did report that students are applying to more colleges than prior years. So combine that with the last one, that could do some harm to yield, and it's going to be tough for colleges to plan. So curious what you're seeing there.
Crazy. I mean, we've all seen the stats. We've all seen every other day, my gosh, 102% increase, in applications. I'm sorry, we can't get to your application. We're postponing you. This is a brand new, the world. Also, I think, let's be honest, the use of the Common App. Kids they're using the Common App more frequently. I think some kids are also saying, well, I just don't know what I don't know. So parents are saying, sure, throw in a couple different apps. And certainly, I, for my part, and we're seeing it pan out in the numbers. I think kids are applying to more schools. And I think, especially with throw in the test optional. Now we've taken it to a new height. More and more schools, of course, I'd say the majority of schools were test optional this year. So that doors to a lot of kids, or I think unlikely expectations. And that was the part that I think was hard for me with kids this year, because, if maybe on a 4.0, you had a 3.9 with the, just tanked those SATs or couldn't go to see them, all of a sudden they thought, oh, for sure, I'm going to get into one of the highly selective schools. Everybody thought like that. And just trying to explain to a 17-year-old, that was kind of hard. I'm sure it's the same way, Pauline. They're all 17-year-old kids. No matter where they live, 17-year-old kids, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I agree with what Cheri said. The statistics we're seeing now certainly indicate that the number of applications has skyrocketed in certain groups of schools. And I know what I have seen, particularly with my West Coast kids, is that's also true in the community colleges. I have students who were trying to dual enroll, were trying to take college level classes, and there was no space. There was no space. So while it certainly is affecting the applications to colleges and universities, it's also affecting the participation in community college courses.
Next one here, a third report the seniors are ahead in their search from prior years. 30% saying that they're behind. So we have a spread there. It's about a third, a third, a third. You know, the students who are ahead, what are some things you're seeing there? And the ones who are behind, what are you seeing?
Pauline,
Yeah, that's a little bit hard because I'm a terrible nag. So for my, that's the truth. So for my students, they may have required a bit more personal attention from Pauline in order to finish the process. I didn't see a significant difference, except the requirement for some more reminders than might have been necessary in the past.
Yeah.
What did you find, Cheri?
Well, I will tell you, I too, I'm glad Pauline said it first. I would like to call myself a taskmaster, but so, you know, what has surprised me is I think kids are the ones that I worked with. The kids that I've worked with, maybe because they've got more time on their hands, because they're not in these extracurriculars, they're more fixated on the process. And there's like 5 touch points. Okay, well, I know I have to do an essay. I know when is the application coming? I'm getting this anxiousness already from these juniors that maybe the seniors last year weren't quite there because we, thank God, weren't quite into the pandemic. They were pretty much done. We got to remember, most of the students, at least that I worked with last year, were finished. You know, well, and so it was then now seniors, now my juniors. So I'm seeing a little bit different. So my seniors were getting on some campuses, but not, you know, at the full like they would have. But what I'm seeing is they're very involved and very interested in, or angry, I should say, why it's taking so, as they say, damn long. They just, it's like they're this instantaneous. First of all, the generation of instantaneous, you know, you turn on something and your computer's there, you turn on your phone, it's there. But they're more curious about why does it take so long? And Will, it goes back to a few minutes ago when we were just talking about the number of applications and the yield. I mean, if you're getting 3 times or 2 times the applications, well, of course the process is going to take, but now they're focused on, well, I don't understand, everything's online. Why don't they just read it and spit out and regurgitate it? So I'm finding that I'm actually explaining the process more than I used to, about committees meeting and reading holistically and, you know, that part. And then I know what our next slides are, so it's really going to dovetail kind of what we were going to probably talk about. But that's what I'm, it's just like the conversations are around, well, where does all that stuff go? And why does it take so long for everything to catch up? And why before a reader actually reads it? And I've never heard juniors and seniors be educated about readers, but they're here in the conversation now. I've got a junior that I'm working with. He's already written his essay. You know, and I'm like, Aaron, we don't even know for sure. I don't think they're going to change the questions on Common App, but it could certainly jump into topic of choice. But I mean, these kids are like, well, I'm supposed to be doing something. I can't go visit. So I guess I'll do that. And I'm also, I will tell you, this particular young man goes to a public school, and that's due to his English teacher. So big shout out to her, because, you know, she's already kind of helping them craft and think as part of her lesson plan, which is a little different, because they've always, at least in my history, they've been so consumed with all the things that they juggle, their extracurriculars, their work life, their home life, you know, their jobs, whatever they do, that now all of a sudden it's like, okay, front and center, college. So
yeah, I think that's absolutely a part of it. They have time because they're not otherwise engaged. They're not distracted by other things. And I think My students seem to be more informed about the process because of the webinars and because college admission folk are doing such a good job of helping prospective applicants understand the process. They're making that so clear. And even though we've always explained it to our students, hearing it from the people who sit in those offices and read those applications, I think is having a real impact on the students in their engagement with the process. And because they're sitting at home with their family and that's what they talk about.
And well, not to digress, but you know what, it's been really interesting to me too. I think now too, a little bit of the perspective of who these people behind, you know, the curtain, the Wizard of Oz, you know, are reading. All of a sudden, they're in their living rooms talking to these kids.
Right.
And the cat sometimes goes behind their head. Or, you know, we were in one recently where I think a 3-year-old ran through or something. It's like, whoops, he wasn't supposed to be. And all of a sudden, it's like, wow, these are real people. They're touching, they're human. They're just not cloistered in this room, you know, talking. But that was that's been the perception for years, is everybody's going to go off and they're going to talk about all of us. But now all of a sudden it's like, and I think that has changed dramatically too. So I think, like Pauline, you said, they're hearing these catchphrases, the readers and the committees, and yes, we might have told them about this, but they didn't pay attention because it was, they were busy. So I think it's really, that might kind of tune into some of your numbers. I don't know. That's just an observation. You know, like I said, when I hear a 16, 17-year-old boy say something about his reader, I'm like, where did you hear that? Or I feel really good because I feel like they're listening to me.
That's right. Recorded.
Fingers crossed, that's it.
They know they have a regional rep. Yay!
Right? Oh, well, I tend to think it's just our personalities, Will, our engaging personalities. Yep. Oh, gosh.
Well, getting into test scores and test optional and all the interesting things going on there, we had 58% of counselors say that they were recommending students take standardized tests. And I'm curious what some of those cases may be and how that's even evolved in the past month and a half.
When you gave this to us, remember I wrote you immediately and said, this December.
Yes.
We filled this out in December, and it's like
already changed.
I'm telling my kids exactly what I heard over the weekend in a fantastic webinar, and I listened intently. Unless if it is going to be a stressor and you have any thought of jumping in your car and driving 2 states away, no, you cannot do this. We cannot guarantee any outcome, none that be whether the test site's going to be open. And or if the schools are going to go test blind, and that's something, you know, really haven't all talked about that at all. I mean, schools could eventually in the next, who knows, say, just like California schools, Pauline's very familiar, they could just say not test optional, but we're just going to go test blind for a few years. And I'm trying to give my kids this answer. I tell them, yes, it'd be good if you have it, because I think it's always a good dipstick. But if it's going to add, I had a family just before I came on this. Okay, she's taken the ACT. This is her scores. They were extremely good. Now should she go back and try an SAT? But we're going to have, and as soon as I saw the but, I wrote immediately and said, no, this, you know, what else are we going to ask? It goes right back to what you were saying on one of your previous slides about the emotional stressors and the behavior and the social. It's like, how much more? How much more are we going to ask these kids? And there's no guarantee they won't walk up to that door and it's been canceled. So that's me. I'm just saying, if it's, God love you, if you can, and it works. But if it's going to be added stressor, the answer is no on my part. I don't know. That's my East Midwest.
And I think it is, in terms of access to tests, certainly is so varied that makes it even more complicated. But my message to my students is, if you can safely, then go ahead and take it. But if you're driving across state lines if you're putting yourself and therefore those around you at risk, then absolutely not, just not worth it. But, I think there's so much, again, we won't know until later in the spring about how admissions decisions were actually made. How were those test optional scores really evaluated? There's so much we don't know. I'll be very curious. And I'll be very curious to see how schools adjust or don't adjust their evaluation processes going forward with another year of possible limited testing. It's way too complicated for me to feel like I can have a distinct, clear answer. But
Right.
number one is be safe and don't put yourself at risk.
Tying into that, only 43% said that they believe their students that students think they will be considered equally if they don't submit test scores. So there's opportunities for some education there, and curious about your context around that.
Well, loaded one.
It is a loaded one. It's a tough one because we can tell our students everything they need to know about what test blind and what test optional mean, but until we see how colleges and universities made decisions around those parameters, around those requirements, I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, it's as confusing to me as it is to students. On one hand, I can say, yes, there are schools that have said they're test blind. Even if you have a test score, they don't want it. Mm-hmm. And that would be a wonderful, clear message that I would love to see more widely shared, but that's in my perfect little world. But I can't, in all good conscience, say to my students, it won't make a difference. I just can't, because I don't know. I don't know.
And I guess what I'm doing, I think that's why now, even though, again, I mean, I know they're tired of virtual. This is, I've told them now we're going into a new phase. This is second semester of junior year. The colleges now know who they're accepting, how this is affecting their group. And I want them to listen if they haven't. I want them to maybe go back again and listen to a different virtual, but I also want them to do a Q&A. I want them to hopefully choose more, not a virtual tour, but a Q&A. And actually ask those, and I mean, kids are kind of looking at me like, can I ask that? Of course you can. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of the education opportunity that we have, that they're consumers. They are consumers. And maybe they haven't been involved and had that kind of involvement before, but yes, ask this question, because just like Pauline said, we don't know. I mean, this is going to be a tough year for everybody. We don't have crystal balls. All the data that we've had before kind of is sliding over a little bit. I mean, again, one of the webinars I just recently attended, they all said grades, grades, grades. It will always be grades first, first, first. Keep telling your kids that. And I have to listen to them because these are the people I have trusted for 20 plus years. Mm-hmm. But for me to be able to tell these kids, I also want them, it's like, well, after a while, I want them to hear it from the people that are making the choices. And if they are so, let's just say, bold to engage in a question or to submit it in the Q&A, that's cool. And I hope that they believe it, because a lot of it, again, goes back to trust. But, they're worried. They understand it's not fair, and we've always heard that anyway, because they have to blame something. It's not fair. It is a process. It happens. Things may not feel fair. But I think that's what I'm telling them is, let's get on these virtual tours, or, maybe not every single one. If you're going to apply to 18 schools, I understand, but bring it down to 5, because now they have their data. They know in the next few weeks who they're accepting and what their class looked like. Ask the hard questions, the EDEA, regular decision, wait list, which, let's be honest, those are going to be deep this year. Those, because on their side, from the business side, in fairness to the colleges, they have got a business to run and they have to protect their assets. And I've tried to explain to these kids the same thing. So some of it's just some minutia conversation that maybe we wouldn't have had before. But that's what I'm doing. I'm saying, let's, and I've sat in sometimes with them and just said, I'll learn with you. I'll get some new data. It's fine. Where we're at.
Last insight here, open forums with current students. This is something you mentioned before too. Open forums with current students and admission staff for the preferred virtual event format. That's something we heard from students back in the fall as well. They want to be able to ask questions. They want short formats. They don't want these 3-hour-long events.
Right.
Any additional context needed? I think we hit this a few times.
I think we did.
I do, and I'm appreciative.
Decisions. Yep.
But I'm appreciative of the colleges hearing and trying to move things and shift things, because we know that change doesn't come easy for anyone, and it's expensive to reinvent yourself. But I've been particularly proud of. I have a little gal that goes to a school, and she was a tour guide, and so what she did, thank God for her, she thought outside the box. She is actually presenting her virtual tour, but she's narrating it live. And
Nice.
that took a lot on her part. I'm really, I tend to think it was the counselor she had,
Absolutely.
but I thought, now see,
Your unbiased opinion.
but see, that's what they're doing. They're open to these kids on their campuses reinventing the wheel a little bit too. So a big shout out to a lot of the schools. I mean, some of these are big schools. I mean, that don't move easily because it's hard. But I'm very proud. I mean, one of my current students happened to bump into her on her tour, and I just thought that was really. She says, "Yeah, I just petitioned and said these are boring. Can I do this?" And they were like, "Sure." Yes.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Kudos.
So yeah, the kids do want to engage. I mean, and especially now, I think definitely the seniors, they definitely do, and even juniors, they're ready. They're ready to rock. They're ready to talk to kids. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, great. We're going to head into the Q&A portion. Just a reminder that you can drop your questions into the panel that usually loads on the right-hand side. For those who came in a little bit later, this is all recorded. You'll get email tomorrow with the recording, additional resources, and the slides. Just one comment before I jump into questions here from someone. They said that some of the increase in applications they're seeing is coming from the parental involvement or over-involvement. I'll editorialize a bit there, where they built the list with the students, they applied, and then mom and dad went back in and added more schools.
Yep.
Yes. So first question here. I think it was actually you, Pauline, who mentioned it. When we're talking about safety, are you seeing, are students talking about safety in terms of COVID or general safety, physical safety, emotional safety?
Both. I would say pre-COVID, in the few years immediately pre-COVID, my students and their families were asking more questions about safety on campus and safety in the areas surrounding schools. And certainly now with COVID, a lot of the conversation, particularly with my seniors, as we move into the making final decisions phase, is around how safe a particular campus has been, those that have opened, how safe they have been during COVID. So physical safety in terms of surrounding and general safety on a campus, personal safety, and the questions around, around health and how schools have handled COVID.
And Cheri, I want to direct this one to you here. You're Kansas City and New England, two very different cultures,
They are?
climates.
No.
I've heard. Are students and families really considering state policies and state infection rates into their consideration?
Again, I'm going to tell you the population, and I think we just have some really good conversations. I'm trying to stay on top of it, but since unfortunately it's such a moving target, I have kids from the Kansas City area that went back to the East Coast, and they were telling me they were being tested twice a week, you know, and yet we've got big state universities, and I'm not going to say any names, that were recently in the Super Bowl and partying hard. And you know, parents are concerned, but fortunately, there's still going to be 18, 19-year-old kids. And I think part of that is the social responsibility of those students to take some responsibility here. And do you want to remain open? And we saw that at the beginning of the year with a major state university that was open, 12 days, and they had to shut down because the kids didn't take it seriously. So I think that's, you know, I think the kids aren't as statistically drawn, you know, but I don't know, because it just changes every day so much. And that's the unfortunate part until this is really under control. Just like we said, by the time we filled out our survey, look what happened, I mean, in 6 weeks' time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wish I could give you a definitive on that, Will.
Yeah. Do either of you have some recommendation for colleges to reach students who have taken a gap year?
To reach them as they're taking their gap, or?
Yeah, so as they're taking that gap year, what are some ways they can reach out and help recruit them and serve them?
Maybe my gap is different than yours, Pauline. Go ahead, and I'll talk to that.
I'm trying to make sure I understand the question. Is the question from the college side?
Yeah.
How can they
Yeah.
reach out to the,
Yeah.
So I think particularly if it is a student who has been accepted and has been granted a gap year, I think it's so important for that college or university to maintain contact with that student during that year. Because what I fear may happen with students, particularly who make a last minute decision to gap, is that they don't see it as a serious preparation for going to that school the next September. And I think that's sort of a dialogue where a student is helped to understand how their gap experience is going to really enrich their transition to college is so helpful. And also to make sure that the student is aware of what is going on the college campus. This is what's happening there now. So when I'm there next year, I'll get to be participating in those activities. So there is a continued connection between that student and between that school that isn't lost during that gap experience.
And for mine, Will, yeah, I'm sorry. So I had 2 students because of COVID defer. They called it a deferral. They didn't call it a gap. They called it a deferral. And maybe that's the new vernacular too, because and that's why Pauline might have been, that's why maybe we were both a little bit, because gapping for us used to mean something totally different, doing something with your time and traveling or studying, and COVID isn't allowing us to do any of that. But my 2 students that did defer, you know, have found, like, one is working for a family, you know, and because the mom and the dad are doctors and they're working, so she's actually a nanny. And but she's telling me, when she's writing to me, she said they're including me in communiques. In fact, she said that it was really interesting, and it's a big state university. They actually had like a Facebook or Instagram or whatever these kids are using now within the school, and they reacclimated the deferral kids into the kids that went ED. And so they kind of assimilated them. So now, okay, these are your new classmates, because they kind of did this last year, if you will, but then when they kind of are doing a reboot, which I thought was pretty cool. So I think that, gosh, anything like that. But I also would hope, if you have deferred or gapped, I would hope that you're a little more mature and you would want to engage as well with the college. I would sure hope, because if you're accepted at this time as a senior, those seniors are sure wanting to engage with those. So, you know, it's kind of an opportunity to show how much, show the love, show how much you love them, you know. But yeah, you know, I think that's really kind of a double. Hey, I really love you. I really want to be there, but just get COVID free.
Yeah.
Right.
I would just throw out too, think about it as just extending your melt programs. You know, you have these melt prevention programs during the summer. Well, you
You got
switch
it.
from a few months to a year in a few months. The same
Really good
idea.
point.
Yeah.
And I've heard from a couple of schools, Will, that are still having some summer programs. They're large universities, but they're still planning summer programs. And they're going to be, for like an exploration or things that might need a couple of extra months. I mean, we all know that there are quite a few without naming names. And I just talked to one rep a couple of days ago. They're still planning. They're still planning to have them on campus. And they're feeling very comfortable because they will be able to be socially distanced. So, I mean, that's awesome. And they're going to offer that opportunity to a couple of those, a couple of my GAP kids are going to jump on that and do it.
Great.
My deferred kids, yeah.
Yeah. Cheri, one person asked what the test optional webinar you referenced was. They wanted to see if there was a recording.
Test optional webinar.
You said over the weekend you went.
With the 5 schools that we're talking about test optional.
I think you said there was one you went to over the weekend that was so helpful.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but now I'm going to plug somebody, and I don't know if I'm supposed to do that.
Go for it.
Okay. It was the wonderful Ginger Fay from Apple Ruth. It was fantastic. It was just fantastic. It was GW, Washington and Lee, Wisconsin, and GTech. And it was Ginger did an amazing job. We kept her at task because it was like ended 12 minutes before kickoff for the Super Bowl. You know how hard, Will, when you tell me a few minutes ago, being from Kansas City and New England, did you know how hard that was for me to see Tom Brady in the uniform? That was the first time and I was torn. I was really torn. Well, I won't go there. Anyway, I got that off my chest. But yeah, it was wonderful. Yes, it was recorded. Yes, and it was Apple Ruth. And Ginger was wonderful, bold to go right before the Super Bowl. But yeah, it was just an amazing. I really enjoyed listening to the small school, Washington and Lee, Wisconsin, state university, GW, private, all their different perspectives. Yeah, so I think that's the thing. Well, for us, we're learning right alongside these kids, and I think that's something that I'm really proud of all of us. I'm proud of Maureen, our membership person, to say let's put our heads together, let's figure out a way to help our members. And so that's part of our requirement now. So we're learning right alongside these parents and these kids. And a lot of it, again, goes back to trust and working relationships.
Yep.
Just like ours, Will.
Yep. Last one here as we wrap up. How are you answering the question when students or parents are coming to you and asking, should they be preparing for the SAT or ACT now? Not an easy one to end on, but
that's a hard one.
Go, Pauline. It's your turn.
Oh, thanks, Cheri. I think I'm a bit of an outlier in what I recommend to my kids, because I do not encourage the majority of kids, unless there is a test anxiety issue, I don't encourage my kids to do much more preparation than being sure they're familiar with the exam. Taking practice tests, being sure you understand the timing, being sure you understand the types of questions and the format of the test. I believe that that's the best way to prepare for the test. So my recommendation is the same as it has always been. And that, along with prepare, and if you can take it safely, go ahead and take it, but do not take any risk. Do not take any risk, which includes going and sitting in a classroom with other students to prepare for a test.
Good advice to end on.
Yeah. And I'm a test prep freaky. I maybe because of being in the Northeast for as long as I was, even if you abbreviate that, maybe you don't 12 weeks, maybe you don't do whatever, but just be, and part of that is confidence and just that
Right.
confidence building, and maybe just reading a couple more of the tests and doing a few more practices. But
Right.
again, as I just gave that shout out, and we have lots of friends in the prep industry, I know the value, and I know these people really, really well, and I think they do good jobs. I have 2 children myself that went through test prepping, and I think it was some of the best investment for my own 2 children. I can only speak, and then the kids that I have referred. But sometimes it doesn't work out, and I think there's nothing worse right now than adding to these kids, especially in front of Zoom. And so that's the thing I'm concerned about too, is a lot of this, and they're well aware of it. They are so well aware of it. But thank you so much, Will, for this opportunity.
Bill.
You're a wonderful
Thank you.
host.
Hey, I couldn't have done this without all of HECA's help, so I really want to thank both of you for your time
awesome.
today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
And
we're
just a
so
reminder.
grateful to you and to Nish for providing the opportunity for our members, for HECA members, to share their insights and their thoughts and their experiences. I think that's so valuable for all of us. Thank you for facilitating.
And we'll look forward to seeing you in our face-to-face, real face-to-face conference too. We really get to see you.
It'll be nice to get out of the house again.
I want to go. Thank you, Will.
Yep. Thank you all for attending. There'll be a
you.
follow-up email tomorrow. Have a great evening and stay safe, everybody.
Thank
All
you.
right. Bye, Pauline. Take care,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye, Will.